Okay, well, thank you. This will be very brief because certainly some of the things that we've been talking about are covered already. The first thing I'll say is the algae are necessary. We shouldn't be finding ways to eliminate them. And I don't think anyone was suggesting that, but they are essential in lots of ways. Production of oxygen is an important thing they do. Like any population, when conditions are good, the population will grow, and sometimes they grow rather bigger than we would like, and we complain about it, and that's the issue we face. The next point I want to make is that we live in a changing world. We didn't used to live in a changing world, and our science is based on living in a world that is not changing. But we're living very definitely in a changing world now. We've greatly modified the atmosphere to the extent that we're greatly changing the climate, and you all know that. And it's quite possible that climate change is an important part of why the lakes seem to be doing things they weren't doing a few years ago with respect to algae. It's undeniable, and you've seen data in both the previous talks that blue-green algal blooms are becoming more frequent. These are data from Muskoka based on reports from the Simcoe Muskoka District Health Unit. The most recent one, there were 6 blooms during 2023, and the lakes in our program, the 12 lakes in our program, had 3 of those blooms. That 4 is because I didn't know that the Bass Lake that had a bloom was not the Bass Lake, which is in our program. And I wish we'd had more names for lakes so we didn't have to name multiple lakes the same name. Anyway, the number is going up, and this is the same slide which you've seen twice in 2 previous talks, simply showing that this is something that's happening much more broadly than just in Muskoka. So the good news is that the algal problem in Muskoka is not a Muskoka problem. It's a bigger problem than that. I don't know if that actually helps, but that's the good news. Why this is happening is not clear, as has been made quite clear in 2 previous talks. What the Watershed Council's monitoring program is trying to do is to get some picture of what the algae are doing when they're not blooming, and using citizen science to do that. The other aspect of the program is to bring more information to the lake associations about what is going on in their lakes and have them engaged in discovering what is going on in their lakes. And that can be very helpful in terms of bringing people to a place where they can, excuse me, where they can understand that there are problems with no easy solutions, and that sometimes it takes time to find out what's happening. The approach we're taking is relatively simple. We have volunteers on each of the lakes who are taking water samples of at least 2 sites every 2 weeks through the summer and into the fall. We encourage them to take them as late into the fall as possible. In other words, the last thing they should be doing before taking the boat out of the water is taking the last water sample, is what we'd like to achieve. And we want to get into the fall because that's when the blue-greens predominantly are blooming. The samples are then frozen until they're analyzed. They're frozen as quickly as possible. They're kept frozen until they're analyzed, and they're analyzed fluoroscopically. And that particular aspect of the technique is based on the group, the Cyanobacterial Monitoring Consortium, which is mostly in the New England states, which has verified that this is a technique that gives repeatable measurements They're not necessarily the same measurements as you would get with a fresh sample. And anyway, the fluorometric approach uses a handheld device which will will measure the activity of chlorophyll A, which is an algae, which is a pigment common to all algae, and a phycocyanin, which is a pigment only found in the blue-greens. And in this way, we can get a measure of the relative abundance of blue-greens through time, and we can also get relative abundance of all algae combined, including the blue-greens through time. The results that we've been getting, we started this program in 2019. 2019 and 2021 were years where we were testing some of the methodology in the field. We missed 2020 for obvious reasons. We've now continued, so 2023 is the fourth year for some lakes, and we've increased the number of lakes each year. This past year, we have data from 12 lakes, and there were 14 lakes that were involved in the project. We almost had data from 14 lakes. This coming year, we're going to have a couple more lakes joining, so the number is increasing, and they tend to be lakes that have had bloom experiences in the past. So they're definitely not a random sample of the lakes of Muskoka. The main things that are coming out at the moment, because we still only have a small amount of data, is that the levels of phycocyanin fluorescence in the samples vary substantially from lake to lake, and they vary substantially through the season within lakes. And unfortunately, none of that variation offers any simple explanation of why some lakes bloom and some lakes don't bloom. These data are for Stewart Lake, 3 Mile Lake, and Brandy Lake in 2023. And Stewart, which is the one on the left at the top, and 3 Mile at the bottom, both had blooms in 2023. Brandy did not have a bloom. Stewart bloomed without ever having phycocyanin more than about 20 units, whereas 3 Mile was up twice that, 3 times that. Brandy was up as high as 3 Mile in the middle of summer, and it didn't report any bloom at all. So what is happening with the population of the blue-green algae is not simple. Let's just leave it at that. It's not simple. We've tried looking at the average phycocyanin levels in each lake in the period from the middle of August until where they stopped sampling, which varies from lake to lake in terms of how late into the fall, but looking at the average level in that latter part of the year. And in 2022, there was a suggestion there might be 3 different kinds of lakes with low, intermediate, and high levels. This year, it looks like there may only be 2 kinds of lakes, 3 Mile Lake and all the rest. You'll see on this thing some of those, I don't see where I have the pointer here, but anyway, some of those individual sites along there are, now what am I trying to say? 3 Mile Lake has got 2 sites. That's why there are two bars for 3 Mile Lake. And I think there's one other that's got 2 sites. It doesn't matter. The point I'm making is that there are lakes which have got higher levels of phycocyanin, and lakes which have got relatively low levels. Stewart Lake may be intermediate, but it's different to last year. So we don't yet know whether we're going to get something consistent out of this, and we don't yet know what it's going to mean, all of which is frustrating if you want to look at it that way, or exciting if you want to look at it the other way, because it's exciting in the sense that it causes you to ask questions, it causes you to explore whether patterns can be confirmed, whether there are things that can be done that will explain why the patterns can't be confirmed. It may well be that there are certain kinds of lakes which are particularly susceptible to blooming. It may be something as simple as whether it's a relatively deep lake for its area versus a relatively shallow lake for its area. It may have something to do with how exposed the lake is to the wind, or how much water is flowing through the lake during the course of the season. There's all sorts of possible things that could be making one lake different to another, and we currently don't have an understanding of that. One thing that is disappointing to me is that phycocyanin fluorescence, the way we're measuring it, isn't going to predict a bloom, because we've had blooms in lakes with high phycocyanin fluorescence before the bloom occurred, and we've had lakes with low phycocyanin fluorescence before the bloom occurred. So it's not going to be simple. But our results are suggesting new ways to sample, and they're also suggesting different questions to ask. We aren't changing what we're doing in 2024, but I think during 2024 we might be looking at possible things to add or alter for the following year and start getting additional information. One example of that is we have asked people to report the occurrence of any blooms they see, both to the health unit, but also to report it on our data sheets. But we probably need more detail than that to get anything useful out of it. And that is something we've got to think about, how to make that recording possible, and also whether we're asking too much of the volunteers. We have to find out what people are willing to do when they're participating in these programs. I just want to end with a comment on the way in which lakes get advisories issued by the health unit, because there continues to be some confusion in the community as to how this works. Basically, when a bloom is seen by somebody, they're encouraged to phone the toll-free number, which is on the screen. This is a Ministry of Environment number, and when that call is made, that triggers a response. A team is sent out from MECP, takes their own samples, and analyzes them taxonomically and analyzes them for the density of algal cells. On the basis of the abundance in the taxonomy, they communicate to the health unit whether there is a bloom or not, and which kind of algae it is. At that point, the health unit issues an advisory. Meanwhile, MECP is testing for toxicity. That takes some time, and the samples are tested for toxicity, and if there is toxicity, that's reported to the health unit, and that is reported out. But that doesn't change the advisory. The advisory sits there advising that there is a bloom and the water may be hazardous and you're not supposed to go near it and stay away from it and be afraid of it. And eventually, when all the problem is gone, that advisory is lifted. The problem is anyone who's been on a lake where a bloom has been reported, the lifting of those advisories is happening very late in the year. This past year, one advisory was issued in August for a bloom, and it was lifted in May of this year, which is considerable period of time after any evidence of a bloom had disappeared on the lake. That is a problem that needs to be addressed regardless of whether we can figure out how to avoid blooms in the future. And that's, I think, all I need to say. The program is starting up right now. We've just produced this morning the annual report for this past year, and the lake associations are getting ready to do their monitoring. And as I say, we have, I think, at least 2 lakes that are joining the program. And with that, I thank you, and any questions?